All right, let's get started. I want to make sure there are time for questions at the end because I'm sure there will be some. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai. Welcome to today's webinar, Beyond Greenwashing, Communicating Your Impact with Credibility. Ke ngā moanga whakahi, ke ngā wai tukukiri, ke ngā mata waka o te motu, ke nui te mihi. To those who connect to the mountains, the rivers, and the oceans across the land, hello and welcome to you. Ko Laura Gemmell, toko ingoa. I'm the Chief Executive at EcoChoice Aotearoa and your facilitator today. EcoChoice Aotearoa is the country's official environmental certification, and we're trademarked by the Ministry for the Environment, but operate as an independent nonprofit. Over the next hour, you're going to get a refresher on the role of the Advertising Standards Authority. I'm sure that you have committed the code to memory, but Hilary is thankfully here to give us all a bit of a reminder. Insights as to how Kiwis what they actually expect from brands when it comes to sustainability these days, and some pro tips on ensuring both accuracy and that your sustainability communications are actually sticking with your intended audience. A few housekeeping instructions. This webinar will be recorded and it will be distributed afterwards along with some extra resources. I will do my very best to allow for some questions at the end of our fireside chat. If you do have a question, there are two ways that you can get that across to us. You can either pop it in the chat box or raise your hand at the end. And again, I'll do my very, very best to get through those. But without further ado, I'll introduce you to, I have to say, our stacked lineup of speakers today. I'm very excited about this webinar. We have Hilary Suter, the Chief Executive of the Advertising Standards Authority. Welcome, Hilary. We have Jason Kate, the Executive Director at market insights company Kantar, which has been monitoring attitudes towards sustainability and trends for the last 15 years or so, probably more, probably lost count there. And we've got Shane Gring, who's coming to us live from the USA, founder of Certainly, a marketing and technology company which provides advisory services to certification organizations and their networks. And we've got EcoChoice's very own Prasanna Nara, who many of you might be familiar with. She is our head of engagement. So thank you very much to our speakers for giving up their time today. And thank you to all of you for joining this important discussion. Hilary, I think it might be logical to start with you and to get a bit of a sort of, I guess, lay of the land in terms of the prevalency of greenwashing in this country, how big of a problem it is, and also, I guess, the role of the ASA in helping mitigate that.
Kia ora, Laura. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. So the ASA is a codes and complaints organisation. It operates alongside the various pieces of legislation that restrict advertising in New Zealand. We have environmental rules in our Advertising Standards Code, which, as Laura said, you would have all committed to memory. And I think what I'd say in terms of, there's absolutely awareness and concern in the community in the greenwashing space. We haven't seen that translate into complaints. So the environmental claims area is not a really large area of complaint for us at this time. The other thing I'd flag, though, there are other regulators that deal with this, particularly the Commerce Commission, obviously, under the Fair Trading Act. And I think the other thing to note is that we don't deal with labelling and naming and packaging. So I think sometimes people see that area as of concern, perhaps more so than advertising, and that would be under the auspices of the Commerce Commission.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for that. I guess in terms of the ASA specifically, what does the complaints process look like for both? I know it's separate for consumers and competitors. Could you talk us through that, please?
Sure. So we have a free consumer complaints process. And basically the easiest way to kind of activate that is to jump on the website asa.co.nz and click on the Make a Complaint button. So we're going to ask you for your personal information. That information is not given to the advertiser, but it is helpful for us to ensure that you're a real consumer. We then are interested in where you saw the ad and what your issues with it are. You don't need to quote the codes about that. It can just be you telling us that you think the ad is misleading, or you don't believe the statement that claims X, or the image that looks like this, doesn't seem right. It can be as simple as that, and that will activate our process. The chair of the complaints board, a public member, will review the advertisement and your concerns, and if there's a possible case to answer, she's going to accept the complaint, and we're going to reach out to the advertiser, the ad agency if there is one, the media company if there is one, and get responses. There's a 7-day kind of window for that, and then all of that information will go to our complaints board, which is a 9-member board, 5 public members, 4 industry members, and the board meets fortnightly. And so the board will review all the material. They in particular will focus on the consumer takeout of the advertisement. It's a really key message that I want to flag to people, not the advertiser takeout, the consumer takeout of the ad. It's the first question the board discusses in its meetings for each complaint. And then they'll make a decision. Upheld, not upheld. If the complaint is upheld, we're going to ask you to remove the advertisement. And then we publish all the decisions on our website. In the competitor complaints process, there's a fee for that process. So it follows a slightly different pattern. It's usually, it can be a bit quicker depending on the time frames and level of cooperation. And the actual complaint, the main difference is it's heard with the parties in attendance. So the advertiser and the complainant join a 3-member panel hearing and present their concerns, and the panel gets to ask questions, and then there's a decision made and published in due course.
Excellent. Hilary, do you think part of the reason that you haven't seen a big increase in greenwashing is the fact that it's kind of misleading by its very nature?
I think that there are, I think some of the tricky things in this area is that perhaps there are a small number of really informed consumers and a whole range of people who perhaps have a level of awareness but are not quite sure. And I think that impacts on how they engage. I'm sure there'll be more information from other speakers about that. And I think also that people are busy, they've got a lot going on. So whether they want to take a formal complaint is something that, we're working on all the time in terms of awareness building. The other thing I know that companies are aware of, and I'm sure concerned about, is the level of informal feedback they're getting about some of the claims they make through social media, for example. So people may choose to go direct to the advertiser and call them out on a claim or ask for more information. And that's obviously, it's really important for the advertiser to manage that as well. And they should also be aware that under the ASA codes, that the content of their social media pages is advertising for the purposes of our codes, and that includes the user-generated comments or content on those pages.
Excellent. Great to get that insight. I guess, in terms of the complaints that you have received, recently, have there been, I suppose, any patterns? Are there common pitfalls that seem to occur? And would you say whether those, I suppose, the brands, whether it's, I suppose, intentional, or there's a level of, perhaps ignorance there? What's the balance?
In our experience, most advertisers are trying to get it right. They're not actually trying to mislead or rip off consumers. That's not a very not a great strategy for building a good business. So most people are trying to do it right. I think some areas where they perhaps could do better, there's some real risk around the translation of scientific data into marketing claims. So I think that's an area to take care in. We most often get complaints in this space about a lack of substantiation. So if you have got the evidence it's actually useful to make that clear in the advertisement, because that will actually bypass a whole lot of issues people have. If you are if you have an absolute claim to make and you're really confident in the evidence that you've got, then you could include in the ad, the basis of that evidence. That can always help in that space, because people often see a kind of certainly a strong claim or a robust claim, and they just don't believe it like that. The immediate takeout is that can't be right. If you've got that evidence, then you should put it in there and be clear about that. I want to just re-emphasize again the importance of consumer takeout. I think it's really easy for advertisers, who are obviously really committed and passionate about their work. They're highly involved in an ad campaign. They've obviously sometimes taken months to build all of the parts of that campaign, and they sometimes lose perspective. So they are very familiar with the messaging. They are really clear on what they want to say, and they're absolutely confident that's what the execution of the ads does. But I would really encourage people to go outside of your kind of circle on that, and ask people who have not been involved, with any luck outside the company, to get their takeout on the ad, because it may not be what you think it is. And that's the environment that you're delivering the ad to consumers in. So they don't have all the context. They're seeing this one image or one video with your claims, with some imagery. They don't have the whole history of why that claim stacks up. And think also about the takeout of the words plus the images. They don't act independently of each other.
That's a really important point. I mean, you've already kind of alluded to it, Hilary, but I'd love to know what, in your opinion, what good looks like, and also, what are the available free resources for businesses to use to make sure they are getting it right?
Look, I think we've got some guidance on our website. So there is a guidance note for environmental claims, asa.co.nz. We've got a range of other quick guides and little videos to help you out as well, particularly in that kind of making claims area. The other thing I'd really encourage you to do is check out the Commerce Commission website. They have some good resources in the environmental space and just more broadly around claims under the Fair Trading Act. One of the things they talked about previously in some of the videos they've done is, if you can't prove it, you can't say it. And it's a really useful kind of short phrase to think about when you're kind of kicking the tires, if you like, on how good the campaign is and whether you can support what you say. And I think the other thing I'd be wary of is, just because someone else is saying it doesn't mean it's okay. So they may have chosen to take a business risk in kind of putting that complaint, that kind of narrative forward. It may not mean that it's the right thing for you to do.
On that risk, Hilary, we haven't spoken about the penalties if you do have a bit of a faux pas, let's put it that way. What is the situation in New Zealand in regards to that? And I know you can only speak from the ASA perspective.
Sure. So people will probably have seen the headlines about the Commerce Commission and the action they can take and some of the fines the courts can impose under the Act. And the kind of concept and purpose behind the ASA and the self-regulatory model is, it's about people taking responsibility at the start of the process. So understanding the codes, being aware of the rules, trying to get it right before they publish or broadcast. If by chance there is an issue with the ad and we get a complaint and they've made a mistake, one option is they can settle the complaint by removing the ad, taking the equivalent action the board could ask for. If it goes through the whole process and the board thinks that they've made an error and upholds the complaint, we're going to ask for the ad to be removed. And in some cases that can seem not to be a very significant penalty, but in other cases it involves the taking a part of a campaign that's cost quite a lot of money and had a lot of booked media around it. And we also release all the decisions to the public, and they are covered in the media. So often people are more concerned about the reputational impact of the decision than actually just losing one ad out of their campaign.
Thank you, Hilary. I think that's quite a good segue to Jason. Jason, as Hilary mentioned, sometimes the fines are not significant if you're a very large company. But what are some of the other, Hilary mentioned reputation, impact to brand. What are some of the other, I suppose, repercussions when
Yeah.
we fail to be accurate or potentially overstate claims?
Mm, mm. So yeah, I agree with the way you're framing it entirely, because there is legal risk, but there is reputational risk and there is commercial risk. And those last 2 points are linked quite closely. And if you think about what the potential legal implication of a fine might be, now the answer to this is going to vary from category to category. But if you just think along the simple logic that, well, there's a whole lot more people that shop at the supermarket than there are people that read the business section of the newspaper every day. And so what that means is that the commercial downside risk of you appearing trustworthy in terms of lost sales, lost revenue, is actually far greater than the legal or reputational risk. Because if I find out that you've been brought up to the Commerce Commission, you'd probably get 10% of the population that would know about it. If you are appearing confusing, duplicitous, dishonest, whatever that adjective may be at point of sale, you've got 80 to 90% of New Zealanders taking in that message on a weekly basis. And so the scale of that potential impact, of course, is completely different. And there's been some really interesting studies done globally that show that there is a 90% correlation, which is extremely strong, 90% correlation between an individual's belief that they have been greenwashed in a category and their likelihood of their purchase behavior being impacted. So it almost perfectly predicts the fact that if I'm seeing stuff that I don't believe or I'm unsure about, in some fashion or form, I'm going to change my purchasing behavior as a consequence of that. And so the commercial risk, we would always argue, leading from a poor reputation, depending on what category you're in, can be significantly larger than any, financial legal ramifications of it. Now, it's interesting, if you think through the calculus that I'm talking through, that's going to be more true the more frequent the purchase cycle is. But at the same time, I'm also aware of the fact that, we've got a lot of, let's say, much slower or lower purchase cycle clients on the call as well today. Let's say I'm a bank or a tertiary education institution or a paint manufacturer or a wallboard manufacturer. I'm not purchasing once a week or once a month. So maybe that calculus doesn't play itself out exactly the same way, but I think the broad principle applies because the average purchase price of those transactions tend to be larger as well, and therefore the commercial implication of them is larger. So I think the incidence is a really important fact here.
Thanks, Jason. And I guess, I mentioned earlier in the call that, and I know this is your work in this area isn't just constrained to the Better Futures report, but obviously it's an incredible resource. And I'm just wondering if over the last 15 years, broadly, have you seen what has been, I suppose, the trends that you've noticed in terms of the factors that Kiwis consider when they're buying a product? Are they more, I suppose, are they doing their research more? Are they, are their decisions led by other factors now? What are some of the key takeaways that you've seen over the years or points of interest?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting evolution because, if you go back 10 or so years ago, there was a real and identifiable group of New Zealand consumers who were quite willing and prepared to pay more for some type of lower impact or better for good or service. But that was 10 years ago. And, those people were identifiable. by income and education and location and profession and all those types of things. And they were also identifiable by their willingness to pay what at that time was quite a sizable green premium for a number of the products that they were buying. Now, as those values and expectations mainstream over time, then what you'll find is that niche segment starts to become a mainstream segment. And so when that happens, people no longer look to better for criteria as their first driver of choice. So now the thing has to work. Actually, my toothpaste has to make my teeth clean, and my investment fund has to provide for my retirement, and it needs to do that really well before it does so ethically or better than what a competing product can do. And that really, I think, is one of the broad, big stories of the evolution of how people choose and what people look for. What was once a differentiator is now only a differentiator once all those basics of what I need and what I expect it to do have been met. And that's a really, really important point for marketers to remember, because I don't think that everyone's really caught up with that change. There's still, sorry, you go, Laura.
Oh no, I was just gonna butt in and say, so what would your advice be to marketers and brands, given that information?
In terms of how they can then deliver to what is now a mainstream expectation. Well, I guess the answer to that is in a couple of levels. Your products and services have to be lower impact. This is not just a messaging story, right? This is a matter of re-engineering the integrity of what it is that you produce. Because if you don't do that to start with, your messaging is going to be fraught with challenge, and it's only just a matter of time until you get found out, because that is the information landscape that we are all operating in. However, let's assume that you've done that, then yeah, that there are a lot of, classic greenwashing traps to avoid. But I think equally it's really important and perhaps preferable to just talk about the good things that you should do, not the bad stuff to avoid. And here we get into understanding issues like just simplicity of message and clarity and credibility of message. And certainly that's where things like, eco certifications and any type of third-party certification can be hugely beneficial. But I think also just appreciating the importance of how to help consumers overcome barriers. I see a lot of marketers and creatives still trapped in the paradigm that says what I need to do is tell people why my good or service is better than someone else's. Whereas actually, if you talk to consumers, they already know what good looks like. They already aspire largely to make better choices in their lives, but there are reasons why they don't. And the reasons why they generally don't have to do with a lack of billboards and social media posts extolling them to do so. It's because there are real practical barriers to them doing it. And that might be around price, or it might be around convenience, or often at its heart is I'm not clear on the impact that this choice will make. And so there's a big difference between showing me the impact that this choice will make and just telling me how you're better in some open-ended fashion than the implied alternative. And so, yeah, it's a matter of tapping into those, helping people to overcome barriers, because they want to do the better thing. They already do, but we're not always helping them over those hurdles.
Is increased transparency. So obviously we're seeing overseas the emergence of things like digital product passports, and usually those are sort of mentioned in conversations when you're talking about, B2B sales. But do you think there is a place for that with consumers, keeping in mind that everyone's busy and, reading what's on a pack or getting your phone out and scanning a QR code is still
Yeah,
another thing you've got to do every day?
I mean, it was like Hillary said before, there is a small number of individuals who would be sufficiently engaged and motivated to, let's say lodge a complaint or have a material opinion about something that the ASA might look at. That reality is true across the whole consumer base. Yeah, you are going to find some people that are sufficiently active to want to check the traceability of a product or verify some aspect of a product. But most people would be looking for mental shortcuts because that is how people make purchase decisions. People rely on heuristics rather than effort. And so, particularly with more regular purchase cycles. Now, again, I mentioned the difference before between regular, frequent, smaller cost purchases, FMCG classically, uh, versus something that is a bigger ticket and I'm going to purchase less often. Now, when that's the case, I generally have the time and the motivation and the engagement to invest in, oh, gee, I wonder, okay, let's actually see where this does come from and how is it made, and let's assess a variety of impact issues which I can think of, or at least they're telling me about at the time. So it varies a lot with individual and the category, both.
But broadly, I think I know I've attended some of the Better Futures report launches over the last couple of years, and cost of living is paramount at the moment. But
Totally.
it hasn't, this, I suppose, responsibility or, trying to do the right thing hasn't faded away. It's still there. It's just that, I guess, weighing up when you make a choice, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting because if you track the 20-year, 15-year, 10-year trends, I mean, sustainability remains a mega trend quite unlike any other. But at the same time, cost of living is a barrier or an obstruction to that quite unlike any other. I mean, there's always a range of reasons why people don't make the better choices that are available to them. And yes, sometimes it's information and sometimes it's convenience and sometimes it's credibility and trust and all those issues. But nothing has obstructed and dampened people's ability to live the lives that they aspire to, quite like affordability. It's been it's been a really challenging headwind, I think.
I think that's something that we as an organization have seen as well. And it's both from a consumer point of view, but also from procurers who are trying to, purchase products and services that are, you know, cheaper. And I think there's a lot of work or a lot of opportunity there around educating people that this green premium might have been a thing 10 years ago, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And it still is to some degree, but there are a lot of mainstream products that are better for the environment and better for people. And there is no premium attached there. They're the same, and sometimes they're even cheaper than, I suppose, others on the market. So I think I personally feel like there's a real opportunity there in terms of telling that story. And it's probably a good time to segue to Shane. And I've seen you vigorously nodding your head along with Jason, Shane. I guess one of the questions I had for you is really around, there's, and Hillary and Jason have both touched on it, is this tension around, the scientific information and then pulling that into a marketing message, and that kind of being, a real tension. What are your, I guess, what are some of the common mistakes you see around that, and what would your advice be to businesses to sort of get that, compromise?
Certainly. Um, the word I kept kind of hearing through Jason and Hillary's overview was this idea of evidence and trust. And I think when it comes to a storytelling, a marketing, a brand, a sales perspective, that purchase or that transaction really comes down to trust. Do I trust the claims that you're making about the product or the evidence that you are purporting to have? And so that trust function really does lead to an opportunity to tell a story and to build that relationship to establish that trust between consumers and brands. And so the ways to do that when it comes to from a marketing or a brand perspective is to avoid things like sort of these vague claims, let's say around carbon friendly or natural materials or uh, green, just generally. I think those sort of vague approaches do lead to a lack of trust because it's hard to argue for those. There's not that the evidence not there because those things are so nebulous. I think when claims are made, let's say about maybe an annual report or in even the marketing messages that are put on ads, not having that data or that context is going to reduce trust when it comes to consumers because they can't find those sources or find those outcomes on your website or on your brand. So really making clear and also I think leveraging the eco choices of the world and the eco labels that are out there are a great way on the counter side to endear trust, to add trust into the claims that you're making because you're working through these third parties that build that confidence and have that track record. And so I think when it comes down to it, for marketers to not market the ambition piece of it, but really market what you can verify and talk about. I really like what Hillary said around if you can't prove it, you can't say it. And I think that echoes with any of the things in my world as well.
Yeah, it's a great rule of thumb. Shane, you've previously said in conversations with us before, so I hope you don't mind me bringing this into the webinar. But you've mentioned that you think certification is sort of the most underrated storytelling tool when it comes to sustainability. Can you kind of shed a bit more light on that?
I do, and I do work with a lot of certification brands and just see time and time again how it unlocks marketing teams, brand teams to really tell an effective story around the impact or the proof or evidence that they're trying to pursue in the seeking the certification itself. And what it allows folks to do is to have a common language, introduce instant context into the claims that they're making due to the shared standard or the public standard that they're using. A lot of programs and most of the more effective programs have independent audits that are involved in the process. And so it allows for that distance or less self-interested bias in the process to have that layer of trust added to the process. A lot of certification groups have these criteria or these scorecards for the work that they do or the standard that they have. And that allows you to take the data that's being produced or collected through the certification process and have milestones against pre-certification, certification, post-certification, renewals. It's all of these moments in the life of the relationship that you can talk about, you can brand, you can build campaigns around to tell that story. And ultimately, it gets back to this whole idea of trust, the transparency that's often offered by these certifications and their standards allows you to not, as a brand, be the hero, but be leveraging this honest guide to the process for the pursuit of your goals, which I think is a great way to kind of build the brand and build the experience together, as opposed to you just sort of like staying on the hill and shouting how great you are. And so, yeah, I think certifications are one of the better ways to tell that story if it's important to you and your brand.
On the topic of honesty and that, I suppose, that continual pursuit of goals, I guess, what would your advice be for businesses, to be around being open about the progress that being made? Your sustainability, gosh, it sounds very Tony Robbins of me, but it's a journey. It's not really a destination, and we're really, I guess, at EcoChoice very focused on continuous improvement, even for those people who are really mature in their sustainability journey. So, I guess my question is really around, how do brands talk about the progress they're making, the gaps that still exist, without crossing that line into overclaiming and risking their credibility. What's the sweet spot?
I think one of the things that we often talk to brands about is not being a hero in their story, but being more of a steward, someone that's along a path. I think the modern consumer does understand that there's not going to be perfection in that process, and they would prefer transparency and humility and proof, but also direction. They know that the business is on a path. And so I think the three things you should probably be doing is any of the claims that you are making sure that they are steeped in evidence. You can back that up. If you can't prove it, you can't say it. So really lean on that maxim there. I think showing progress and a to-do list are helpful ways to allow the consumer to know sort of what's on the horizon, what you have done, what's next. And then also separate the aspirational pieces from the achievement pieces. I think while it's great to talk about some of these big hairy goals that you might have, it's harder to tell that story in conjunction with like the verified results. I think you need to show that this is a progression, and that aspirational point might not be ever achievable in some instances. And so the fact that you're making steps is a great way to tell that story, that you're a steward of this standard, and of these efforts. I think another important piece that I like to remind our partners is to not fall on your sword. So if, let's say you do mess up, if you do not achieve a certification, you don't hit your goals, don't make it a personal failing, but more about the process that you might not have been able to achieve. And so I think by stating goals and maybe not achieving them, being very clear that they weren't met, and then offer the consumer why weren't they met. The supply chain, you weren't able to reach certain things, and be honest with that, and then talk about what you're going to change to either adjust your goals or adjust the next step of the effort that you're going to take. And so I think just being clear and accountable and showing that progress over time, potentially with a certification as well, is sort of a great way to really move forward and give people clarity on what you want to achieve and how you're doing it.
Sorry, Jason has very politely raised his hand. So I think he's got some thoughts to contribute here.
Yeah, I just really wanted to reinforce what Shane was saying around what that transparency looks like. And I think it can be quite powerful to view that from a consumer's perspective as well, because step into the shoes of an individual householder who has, for the last 10 years, more really, been bombarded with messages around the life that they should be leading and that to which they should be aspiring, are constantly conscious of all that which they are not doing. And so as a consequence, they have their own internal narrative around what they can do, which is okay, and when is enough, and when is that not enough, and all these types of things on which we either judge or forgive ourselves relative to these emerging standards that we see and hear all around us. And the reason I'm saying this is because companies are more often than not too scared to recognize that reality, because when, like Shane is saying, I'm going to use slightly different words from what Shane was saying, but I'm pretty sure we're saying the same thing. if you can make yourself that little more transparent and vulnerable by saying, yes, we are on this journey and we're not here yet. We are a steward of this, but we are not perfect. Then people recognize themselves in that business because everyone knows that they're not perfect. And they feel really shit about the fact that they can't do all these things that they want to do. And businesses that make them feel, oh, look at us, we're perfect, and someone's inside there thinking, but I'm not perfect. Those are the businesses that get shot down in flames because they're trying to make themselves out to be something they're not. And it's such a counterintuitive thing for a marketer to do, to say we're not perfect. But in fact, that's what consumers respond to because they know they're not perfect either. This is a challenge we're all in together. And so the extent to which individual householders project themselves onto organizations, I think it is something that's massively underappreciated. And so that's why that starts to work for lots of reasons, but that's one of the reasons why it starts to work really effectively.
I think there's also, we've seen a few businesses on the other side of the coin, most of them sort of overseas examples, I guess, but, this kind of idea around if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough as well. You're not aiming far high enough. Like if you set the bar low and conquer it immediately, like I think again, it's just like I think there's some quite rich storytelling that doesn't happen in that regard. Hilary, you've also got your hand up very politely.
Just really quickly on that theme, I agree with what's been said, but you could also think about, and perhaps challenging with them in the marketing space, about under-promising and over-delivering. It's not necessarily a bad idea. And the other thing I'd say is that it's just a watch out for when you're the difference between hyperbole and an actual claim. So which are you aiming for? Are you talking about being the best in the world, which is impossible to prove, or are you talking about something a bit smaller, which is measurable, and just really being clear on which pathway you're taking and how you're going to approach supporting those claims.
Hilary, just sort of follow-up question. Shane, I'm sorry, I will come back to you in a second. Actually, anyone could answer this question really, but I'm just, Shane, you mentioned, don't fall on your sword when you don't sort of reach your goal immediately. But I'm just wondering if in the space of making a claim, and if you find yourself on the wrong side of the ASA, is it better to immediately fall on your sword and be honest, or we've messed up here, or is it better to double down?
Look, I think if it's really obvious that it's a mistake, someone's misread the data, there was an honest mistake in some of the comms that went out, then I would absolutely put your hand up and provide context around that and fix the error. If it's something that you believe in, that you think you can support, and there's just there's different views on whether you've got it right or wrong, then by all means, argue your case. And I think the other thing is that advertising is a creative business, and people often push boundaries, and that's a good thing. But just go into that with your eyes open.
Rosanna?
Yes, definitely agree with that, Hilary. I am always of the opinion that it's a good idea, PR-wise, to apologize if you sort of, there's been a scandal and there's, your brand's been outed for making a claim that's, maybe quite outrageous. It's really about whether you've done enough to prove the validity of those claims, I think. And if you've got the evidence, and like Hilary says, it's a misunderstanding, then you would have no problem coming out and making a comment on it, because that's what people want to see. And usually if you've come out and you've really clarified what it is, people are not going to get up in arms about it. They're just going to be like, yeah, it's a fair misunderstanding. It's when it tries to get swept under the rug, or there seems to sort of be a non-apology excuse. That's sort of when they get into deeper trouble, I think.
Yeah, and I think one important point that we find is, especially with brands that have earned our eco label, it's a great tool for verifying your claims for sure, but it doesn't make you bulletproof. You still need to adhere to the code and things like that,
Yes.
So Jason?
I just thought it might be useful to throw in a couple of data points here just to validate a lot of what people are talking about here. There is approximately 50% of New Zealanders who would agree with the statement that a lot of the things that businesses say are dishonest. However, there is about 75 to 80% of New Zealanders who say that a lot of the things that businesses say are confusing. And so while that sentiment for both exists, as consumers, we are more primed to look for misunderstanding than we are primed to look for disbelief. And what that tells you is that, yes, there is a level of pretty strong, cynicism and mistrust, but actually people are still more open than closed to the idea, you know what, we got this wrong, I'm sorry. And just a decent, valid, credible explanation. The door is never closed to that one.
Yeah, that's a great insight. Thank you, Jason. Shane, obviously we've been, I think many businesses are acutely aware of brand risk, and sometimes that can lead to something we call greenhushing rather. Can you, is that a safe strategy as far as you're concerned? And have you seen instances where that has not played out well for a business?
I think in the long run, it's not a safe strategy. I think there is just an opportunity to what Jason was referring to in his last comment around messaging clarity. So it's not necessarily about saying less or hiding, but just maybe getting more precise or more targeted in what you're actually articulating. And so part of the ways brands can do that is to adhere to standards and use those as that medium to talk about things. Use the clear, verified data, share both progress and gaps, and be humble in the process. I think that's a way to avoid not talking about these important things that for you or your brand. And so this sort of like still transparent, but maybe perhaps more precise with facts, lack of hype, lack of and more like systems that are supporting the work that you're doing. I'd say from a sort of a US context, we've gone through a hell of a year here around some of these more progressive measures, either around sustainability or DEI. And so it's been somewhat heartening to see some brands rise up and stay strong and continue to be resident in their values, the Patagonias of the world. But it's also been disheartening because other brands have had to fold or decided to fold based on political pressure or funding. So it's been interesting to see how that has played out for my country, given the current political headwinds here. And I'm optimistic, but it's been certainly an interesting year for people that are trying to promote this type of work.
Have those brands, Shane, that have sort of really dug their heels in, and I don't like using this expression, but another alternative fails me at the moment, but essentially stuck to their guns, have they been rewarded for that in terms of consumer sentiment?
I think time will tell. When it comes to, I think the folks that have been more publicly have publicly rolled back some of their projects, let's say the Target of the world, a big shopping store. It had much more negative effects on them and negative brand and loss of trust when it comes to from a consumer standpoint. So I'm less on the data side and more sort of the impressions and metrics side. So I think the time will tell. Hopefully we just have a better election next time around, but we'll see. Avoid it in the future.
Jason?
Just to complement again what the point Shane's making here, different context, more kind of global Northern Hemisphere commercial, not just American cultural, but certainly if you look across the last 10 years, where maybe some of the headwinds may have been more commercial rather than political cultural. But certainly there's a strong database of evidence when you look at the correlation between investment in sustainability and sustainability messaging and then resulting company value at a company valuation financial perspective. There is a very, very clear correlation between long-term commitment and long-term business value and survival. So yes, and I can send you some of those numbers, Laura, if you want, but you look at the chart and it's pretty obvious. Yeah.
Sorry, everyone. Forgot I was on mute. Prasanna, I'm going to throw to you now. I'm just, I guess, one of the things that often comes up, sort of just coming back to, making a claim specifically, one of the things that often comes up, or we hear, is that, in terms of justifying a claim or backing it up, sometimes if it's say an FMCG product, which is on the smaller side, there is not a huge amount of real estate, and they can't put a big long explanation about how they've achieved various goals. Do you have advice on that front? What are some ways that businesses can overcome that?
Yeah, that's a very real problem that I think marketers and creatives have to deal with all the time. I really like suggesting that businesses have a sort of robust space where they house all of this evidence that they have to back up their claims. So that could be an independent audit report. It could be a sustainability strategy, even a web page on their website, talking in detail about what they're doing, what are their targets, what are they working towards. And then that makes it a lot easier to sort of, you still don't want to take anything out of context, but if you've got to shorten things for your packaging, or you're doing just a one-liner campaign or a billboard, a social media ad, it can lead somewhere else in your branding space. So it's not just a random comment taken out of context.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've seen some really great examples and worked with brands on this about, making sure, web pages are accessible and, businesses' stance on particular ingredients or their achievements, and really having that information accessible and clear can be a really neat way of going forward. I guess I just want to kind of circle back to the start of the conversation, and then we might have just a few minutes for questions. Sorry, everyone. I was hoping that you could get or give us a bit of a lay of the land, particularly for anyone on this call that might be exporting, in terms of what are other jurisdictions doing in relation to greenwashing?
Yeah, so this year the European Union was going to introduce the Green Claims Directive, which was really going to be a law requiring companies to substantiate all of their environmental claims with evidence and actually submit them for verification before they can be made. Sadly, that law is currently been tabled for now, so we're not quite sure what's going to happen. But there are individual countries that are still taking action. So I think the biggest one, the one closest to us, is the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. So they've really taken some high-profile brands to court this year, like Banana Boat and
Oh, Prasanna, I think we might have lost you. Oh, doesn't look like it's going to resolve itself. Okay, Prasanna might have. I'm going to blame Hillary for this because she cursed us at the start around technical difficulties and making it sound like it was all going to be a walk in the park.
Oh,
The global
sorry.
picture, I'd like to
She's
say.
back. She's back.
lost
We've
me
lost
there for a
lost you
while.
for a bit there. Yeah.
Sorry, what did you last hear me say?
Banana boat.
Got it. All right. Great way to stop. So yes, Australia's taken brands like Banana Boat and Clorox to court this year over some of their misleading claims. We've also seen the UK come out and say they're going to impose fines of up to 10% of a company's global annual turnover if they are making misleading environmental claims, which is huge. And then in Asia, we've seen a couple of countries take action as well. So South Korea is moving from just like guidance documents to actually imposing fines of up to like 3 million won, which is around 1,000 USD, sorry, 2,000 USD for companies making greenwashing claims as well. So it's, I think, important if you're exporting to really know the rules of the country that you are selling to. And just taking proactive action, like not waiting for laws to come into place, but genuinely working to see how you can provide evidence for those claims.
Fantastic. Thank you, Prasanna. We've only got a few minutes left. I'm so sorry. I do have a bunch of questions I was still hoping to ask, but I'm going to hand it to the crowd now in case they have any. Doesn't appear to be any in the chat box just yet. Does anyone raise their hand, have a burning question that you'd like to ask? This is going to be remarkable if you guys are off the hook. This never happens. Oh, okay. Well, it looks like you've dodged a bullet there. Not that I was expecting anyone to be out of order. But I suppose any last comments from our speakers today on this topic, or any I suppose key messages you'd like to provide to the businesses who've taken time out of their day to attend and obviously make sure that they're getting this right.
Yeah, I'd like to add something. I think right now a lot of marketers treat sustainability as sort of a separate thing from their strategy, and I think it's really important to start embedding that into your marketing strategy. So, educating people on your team about what are the terms, what are the jargon, like what do those things mean? Like Jason said, understanding that so that you can explain it simply to your audience, and no longer having a disconnect, between sustainability strategies and marketing strategies, but actually really trying to see how those two things can work holistically so that you are not in any danger of greenwashing.
I think that also extends to sales strategies as well, right, Prasanna? I think we've seen, again, businesses we work with, we're very happy to help them on this front, but making sure all elements of the business actually know how to speak about your claims and doing that accurately, not just so you're staying on the right side of the law and things like that, but also there's a real missed opportunity if your sales team doesn't know how to talk about, some of the achievements your organization has made or efforts they're making and things like that. So yeah, I think that's a really, really important point. Shane, Jason, Hillary, any last thoughts?
I just really quickly emphasize again the whole consumer takeout aspect. It can be different from what the advertiser intended, and I think any intel you can get on that ahead of pushing the button is going to be worthwhile.
Perfect.
Yeah. And we touched quickly on greenhushing, and it's kind of, I think, hidden underneath the whole conversation in some ways, and maybe we could have made it a little more explicit, but like so much of what we talked about is at the same time the reason why brands and businesses feel hesitant to put their foot forward. But at the same time, implicit in there is all the reasons why they can't be courageous and that they still have to do it, because it is now a proven creator of long-term brand value and financial value. And that's before you've, even if you're someone or a business who is coming at this issue from a completely non-ethical perspective, it is a, proven commercial driver of value. And that issue alone, I think hopefully should really inspire and motivate people to see, look, I know it's a judgmental consumer base. I know there is mistrust and cynicism there, but we can't run away from this because it's just too important not to.
Yeah, I think there is a courageous element there, and it's probably a little bit altruistic, Jason. But I think one of the things that I suppose galls us about greenwashing as well is that when an organization, when a brand talks about their efforts and their achievements, it really makes their whole industry accountable, and it begs the question why others aren't doing the same. So, I think, in terms of collective effort and really wanting to make an impact, there's a level of responsibility there to talk about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to segue, because Louise has just asked a question in the chat. How can you show transparency when you can't share a formulation, in brackets, trade secret? I'll have a short crack at this, but I might hand to either Prasanna or Shane to pick this one up. But I think transparency, it doesn't, it's not about trade secrets. You can talk about your processes. You can talk about, that you've removed ingredients or materials, for instance, that have had a negative effect. I think there's lots of ways around it. Transparency isn't just around your formulation and what goes into the product. It's how, you might not be able to talk about sourcing, but assurances around it being ethically sourced and potentially looking at a certification in that regard, I think is quite helpful. Those sorts of things. Prasanna, Shane, do you have any other words of wisdom on that front?
Quickly, it's all about your journey. I think talk about the discussions you're having and why this might be important to you. Talk about the certifications you've evaluated. Talk about to Laura's idea, like the things you've removed potentially. So everything that all the decisions and discussions you're having around this path of transparency is content, it's messaging, it's story, it's brand. And those are all things that won't give away your secrets, but can help you build trust with potential customers.
Yeah, there are two sides to it. I think there's the very product specific side of like, what you've removed, or other parts of your supply chain that you've worked on improving this whole time. But also there's a leadership story there, like the fact that you care about this, and it's something your brand stands for. And it may be that you've done things this way for a very long time. So, highlighting all of that, I think, can still really set you apart without having to reveal your blueprint to your audience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. We're officially over time, and I've got a big red light flashing at me. I appreciate everyone who's stuck on the call as we went over time, and thank you very much again to our speakers today. As I mentioned, we've recorded this, so we'll send it out if there's any pieces you want to replay, but we'll also have a resource pack that we'll send out with, again, some of the ASA guidance, the latest copy of this year's version of Better Futures, and no doubt some other pearls of wisdom there. So we will aim to get that out in the next couple of days to you. But thank you so much for everyone taking time out of your day. We are at EcoChoice really happy with it. It doesn't matter if you're certified with us or not. We're really happy to have a chat with you guys about this stuff and how you can get it right. So please get in touch if you want to continue the conversation. And I think Prasanna has got a lovely little QR code, because just to make things easier if you want to learn a bit more about us and what we do at EcoChoice. So thank you again. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Kia ora, everyone.